we good? Okay. Thanks everyone for coming back after our short break there. I hope that you all agree that the coffee has the right strength. I enjoy it very much. Let's see if we can get our colleagues from outside also to join us here again. Second gong. Yes, quickly. Just while we're waiting for the colleagues from outside, just a little anecdote. As we just talked about the potential of a purple cloud, I just thought if this was an IoT conference, you all would have gotten a wristband that would start vibrating if you're too far from the sessions. So maybe we look at that next year. And you're laughing. I have actually seen that in a restaurant in Taiwan, where instead of calling the waiter, you turn around a little, I guess it's Bluetooth LE device, which then makes the wristband of your waiter vibrate and lets them know that you want to order something. So we'll look at improvements for 2020 there. Thanks everyone for coming back. I want to take the opportunity, since we have a very lax schedule, I'll drop in information about the foundation after talks when I feel that it's necessary to shed a little bit of light on how the foundation actually works, because the member companies here are involved in different aspects of the foundation, and some things are maybe not as transparent as they could be. So I wanted to pick on the point, on the question that we had earlier, how service providers would come together and drive this product vision that Mike was talking about. And the foundation is actually about 1 year ago readjusted its governance structure ever so slightly to match a product development lifecycle in a company like an ISP, where we now have something called a product steering committee, which has already existed, and it is slowly growing, or has been growing over the last 12 months. It is now actually coming together as a group quite regularly. It has also had its first decision, so we now have the first product working group, so that's more of a marketing focused or marketing product focused working group to kind of mirror the setup that we have with the TSC, and that's the lifecycle management product working group that has been instantiated. We'll also send out or make the invite available for the membership at large very soon, hopefully this week or next. And then once you have the product committee that decides or aligns on a way forward for the foundation, this information would then be transferred basically to the TSC as a request to solve the problem. So we want the product committee to define what the problem actually is and say why we want to solve this problem, and then hand it over to the experts in the TSC on the technical side of the foundation to then define how that can be done in a standardized way. And that can be either a standard or an implementation or both, or work with another standards organization, bring them in to manifest this. What you have is rough guidelines here or rough scope, the architecture, API, security, and then also what we have is the concept of projects, where we have implementation projects that are treated slightly differently in the foundation, or have been at all times. Right now they have the same setting as a working group, because they drive a lot of the standardization that we do in Purple, or alignment that we do in Purple. So Purple Mesh and Purple WRT being the two prominent examples here. And then the fourth pillar, so to speak, or the fourth step in that flow would be the certified test labs, that is hopefully soon, but it's still in the future, and we still have to figure out how to actually do that. There's things where it's probably easier, like the high-level API, that's going to be relatively straightforward to test it, but low-level API, not so easy. Full stacks, maybe also not so easy, but let's see. So I just wanted to give you this overview. That's what the foundation looks like. Governance-wise, there's a lot more information around that, but I don't want to bore you with that. I would like to get back to the actual program here. And the next conversation that we're going to have is around the high-level API, where I'm not quite sure who's going to come up on stage first. Could that person please raise their hand? Who's going to come up first? Aha, okay. So then let me introduce you, Shukru from IOPSIS. He's the R&D manager, and he's going to talk to us about the high-level API. This is the right moment to applause.
Thank you. Actually, maybe you can even be on the stage as well. We can fit together. Okay.
If you're wondering why I'm here on this stage, I'm a very shy person. I don't speak very well in front of people, or I try to. So I was invited to speak a little bit about the high-level API and the perspective from the perspective of ISPs. I'll be glad to share with you a few moments, and then I'll hand the microphone to Shukru to share the presentation.
Let me quickly jump on that specific page. That's okay.
Okay, so I would like to say a few words first as a history. I attended last year OpenWRT Summit in Lisbon, and a lot of people approached me and were wondering, what the heck is Verizon doing here? And I started talking to them that we would like to change pace. We would like to change our business model so it corresponds to something that is flexible and very quick to adapt to different solutions and faster path to market. And a lot of people looked at me, and then we started talking, and people opened up. And at this point, I was sure that everybody had our attention as Verizon, as somebody that wants to change the game. With that said, I'm so glad that I have Randy and Mike joining us today with us after so many months of design and deliberation and getting to a solution that we want to get. We finally are on the right track. We decided that purple is the way to go. That's why we're here. And I thank you guys very much, because joining Purple Foundation was one of the key points that a lot of companies actually did after Verizon joined. And I'm glad that we're such a good influence on the industry and on everybody else. Now, with that said, we're talking about high-level API. And a lot of people take that and don't know what exactly that is. I would say that from our perspective, high-level API is an abstraction layer which allows us to be independent of any vendor that can serve us any kind of solution that we can plug on top as applications, and that application can actually reach all the way down to the kernel if necessary. And if I'm going too down into the weeds, please let me know. I'm kind of engineer going too much technical. Sometimes Mike is kicking my butt because of that. So our whole idea behind Purple was, hey, how do we get to separate hardware from software? But furthermore, how do we get all the software houses to work for us? Because we know, at least from our perspective, we already shared that Verizon doesn't have software development house and doesn't look forward to have one. And this is one of the answers that I want to expand on when Mike was talking about, and Wojtek actually asked, how do we get the money that is paid for all this work? Well, here's how we get the money. Software houses can build services for us that we can plug on top the high-level API and make sure that it complies with the same API and the same standards that we're trying to establish. This way, we can interchange different solutions. At the same time, as a service provider, we're going to go to a software house and say, please develop this stack for us. It could be the operating system stack. It could be higher up in the applications. It could be anything from top to bottom. For example, a security solution may include a kernel driver, may include a service, and may include a containerized solution on application level to, let's say, implement parental controls, more sophisticated filtering of high-level content, etc. So from that perspective, I see it that ISPs in this context will benefit from every one of the software houses. It's not going to be we're going to point to one and say, you're ours forever. No, that's not going to happen. We're going to be changing software houses independently of, of the solutions that we want to get, independently of the environment that we want to have, simply because some solutions are more competitive than others, or some solutions have features that we want, the other solutions may not. So from that perspective, I think everybody in this room, as a software vendor, can benefit from all that. Once you comply to that high-level API, and your application, of course, with the low-level API as well, your application actually could be part of our ecosystem. And I am sure that I speak for the other ISPs, and I would like to ask them to confirm or correct me if I'm wrong, but everybody wants to have a very flexible and a system that actually satisfies the customer. The other perspective when I say customer is also that we want our customers to have better experience. So far, you already know how many hours people spend on the phone waiting for service to be corrected or to be upgraded or something's going wrong, need to be fixed. We want also our systems, with the help of the low-level and high-level API in purple, to be more proactive. Once we detect a problem, we want our applications to be able, through the standard channels, to send us a message and to say, okay, I can try to fix this problem in a very standard and way that will not diminish the performance of the router and will not cause the customer to panic. Also, if there is a need, yeah, the customer can try to call on the phone, but we want our systems to be proactive and to make sure that we improve tenfold, if you want, our customer experience. And the high-level API that we're looking for is something that will be very light and does not burden the system with too much resources, too much memory. At the same time, we want this solution to be so easily pluggable from all kinds of applications, from the point of all kinds of containerized solutions. And when I say containerized solutions, that's actually the trend going forward, to be able to take any container from any of the software vendors. Of course, when it's signed properly and secured, and it's proven that it's something that we can plug into our customers' boxes, let's go and use it. So I'll hand the microphone to Shukru to get down deeper into the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Evgeny. Hi, everyone. So for some of you who don't know me, my name is Shukru, but it's spelled as Sukru since there is no English letters to spell it correctly. So what I will try to do is I will try to give examples on how do we build apps and services on OpenWRT-based devices today without high-level API, and how would that change when the high-level API is ready. But I would like to start with, as now that we have actually listened to the view of the operators, a small view from a software vendor, why Purple is important to us as well. So just to summarize what we do in IOPSIS is that we try to make an OpenWRT-based enterprise solution for CPE products. And for that, over the years, we have been extensively working on creating a framework which both facilitates integration of new SoCs, but also provides a service development environment for higher level development. And you will notice that if you look at Purple WRT and play around, that lots of our contributions mainly focus on that area, is actually contributing on this framework pieces. So why are we doing that is also mainly so that we can also focus our efforts to follow the standards, comply with the framework, and shift our focuses on developing more innovative applications, so we will help our customers, operators, or hardware vendors, and etc., which will also through them to the end users offer better services. I think both initially Mike and then Evgeny already touched very good on the operator's view on that level. So, and how I will try to demonstrate that today now is actually giving with a couple examples of today and tomorrow. Let me quickly go to the slide. But first, let's start with a checklist of requirements of an open service development environment. So when I look at this list, first thing I see is the APIs. As Evgeny also said, these APIs are very important, which will abstract the gateway functionality and which covering it end-to-end and allows you easy way to interact with it. So that actually the consumers of this product can build services independent of both SoC, but also the specific software platform, so that it can be seamlessly moved. And then you need a security layer, which is one other very important topic for the operators. On that, what we mean with security is, first is the access control. I think role-based access control is very important. The session handling is very important, but also API security might involve things like brute force attack protection, denial of service, and etc., code injection and such. And then you need expose these APIs over different protocols so that you give the developers flexibility to choose their tools for building their services. Let it be WebSockets, MQTT, XMPP, and etc. And then the other important part, which we see all requirements from operators over the recent years, is the containerization to improve portability and also the security. Now, feel free to correct me if there is anything missing in this list or if you think that's not necessary. Otherwise, I'm moving on to how now one can tick off this list in an OpenWRT-based platform. So what you see now, mainly OpenWRT, you will see that, of course, a gateway consists of configuration functions and events. Now, on OpenWRT platform, you can wrap this level with UBus by exposing all these gateway functions over the system IPC, which is UBus in this case. And then you do add the security layer using an important component of OpenWRT, again with RPCD, which the Purple version includes some security enhancements. And then you have different OpenWRT supported packages for WebSockets, UHTTP, XMPP, and MQTT, and etc., that you can find all those pieces. And then the containerization that can be achieved through LXCs. So when you look, you have pretty much all the pieces you need to build the service development environment. This is just a more traditional way of displaying the previous picture, but I will directly go on to the next slide, now actually giving an actual example how this is done today on OpenWRT-based platforms. So when we look at this screen, that you will see some bunch of boxes, but first we can start with this main two important boxes, which is one, the OpenWRT UCI, which is UCI is OpenWRT's configuration interface, And then OpenWRT default with vendor extensions can have lots of manager applications to control the gateway functionalities, which I have listed there as user space application applications controlling gateway functions. So both of those components provides objects on UBus, which then allows you to now, through UBus, you can control the whole functionality of gateway, configure everything, get all the events, register for the events, but also pretty much do all kind of operations to control the gateway. Now, with these pieces in mind, exposed to UBus, now you see these other components on top, such as WebSockets, XMPP, and MQTT. Today, if you take a Purple WRT build, which is based on OpenWRT, you will see that you can enable these UBus APIs over JSON RPC through WebSockets. Now that you got your, and then you can simply bring in Mosquito for enable it over MQTT as well, etc. Now, with this, now you see that you have all the building blocks for actually building these applications on top. So how us and our customers today build services on top is that we provide simply, besides these APIs, we also provide a web UI framework, which is based on JavaScript, also available on Purple WRT, which allows you to build JavaScript-based widgets, which you can run these things on your gateway, remotely somewhere else, but also you can simply convert this to an application. But more importantly, you can also bring in containers, containerized apps and services, which by default in OpenWRT, you could limit access to the WebSocket RPC and pretty much replace access control based on role of the user or origin of the user, and etc. And treat these containers like an external device. And then start with a very secure, very limited access, and then increase the access control with whitelisting. So again, we have those pieces. And then, of course, you have the cloud connection, and then you can build apps and services directly on the host or remote. So, but I will not stay so much on these details. I will specifically give an example on how today, for example, USB is built. USB support is built on top of a Purple WRT-based platform without having high-level API, and then we will switch how it would work actually when we have a high-level API. So I'm assuming most of you here already know what USB is, and I think the talk after me might also from BBF might touch that on a little bit as well. But USB is simply the new we can call it the new protocol from the Broadband Forum, which is enhances the capabilities of CWMP. And then it is expected to be the next gateway management for this industry, but also since due to its support of multiple controllers and better API specifications, that it aims some building service on top as well. But now I will just specifically talk how actually it's built on OpenWRT-based systems today. So as I had mentioned, all the gateway functions and configuration now exposed to UBus on OpenWRT-based system. So today, when you take the Purple WRT, which we have contributed this BBF data models library, it sits on top of those objects. So it simply takes the TR-181 data model, USB data model parameters, and then maps them to UBus and UCI, which allows you to now provide you with a C library exposing all these USB functions. And on top, there's a USPD component which takes this C API and exposes to UBus, so that you have a USB object on UBus, which you can access through the system IPC, but also over the WebSockets, RPC, and etc. And then you can simply limit access, implement access control on that object. And then we have taken this OBUSP agent, which is shared by BBF and CompsPop, and thank you for that contribution. And we have integrated it on top of this USP object. So the only thing now today you need to do on OBUSP is just register your data model nodes and then just do the necessary call to the UBUS USP object, which is actually then very short code development. But the actual development happens on this BBF data model library part, which you actually, most of it can be achieved by simply adding some kind of mapping. And here I will just, that's a very bad text over there, but what we show that is that how easy it is actually when you have this clear UBUS UC APIs is to support BBF data models, which simply you will see some mapping entries there showing if you want to have channel property, you map it to this UCI. If you parameter, if you want to do channel in use, you map it to this UBUS object. And the code is automatically generated, but you can also, instead of code generation, you can put the JSON file on the box and it will dynamically support this. So it reduces the code development quite a bit, and you need to do actually manual development only the parts where the direct mapping is not possible. And I will quickly, this is just some examples of the USP API on UBUS and then some example UBUS objects and UCI objects. That's all these pieces now in place. Then, of course, we talk about this in many platforms, and then we also talk about Purple framework and high-level API. Then we get this question quite a bit, saying that if we already have this framework allowing consumers to build SOC agnostic services, why do you need still a high-level API? Why do you bother? That's actually, Evgeny already very well explained. That's why do we need that, is that, okay, with this kind of approach where you actually extend, OpenWRT has lots of the capabilities, which then you can extend with vendor specification, but there are two things. You can still run it across different SOCs, but you still rely on this software vendor first to cover end-to-end coverage of all the gateway functionality, and also you rely on their API extensions. There is OpenWRT APIs, but you also rely on the vendor extension APIs. And that's first thing. Then you still somehow depend on vendor extensions when you build your services on top. And the other is that if you want to move the services to another OpenWRT, if you want to move the services on a non-OpenWRT based platform, let's take the example RDKB, then it's not possible. So OpenWRT has all the coverage, very well coverage with vendor extensions, but still some operators here might want to use a different platform than OpenWRT, but still build services that can work on these various platforms. And this still requires, please go ahead. No, I just showed USP as an example.
Stop. Sorry, could you just, for the audience at home in front of the TVs, just repeat your question?
No, I'm just trying to understand what you explained. So are you proposing to use USP as an API between the, sorry, I have an echo here, between the application and the underlying platform?
No, the USP here was to demonstrate how actually you can build a management component on top of OpenWRT-based platform today, rather than suggesting usage of USP. Because USP, there are two hot topics. It's mostly that vendors or operators look at when actually moving their services between different platforms. The most obvious ones is Web UI and also their management components like TR16 and USP. And for that, we have taken USP as an example, how it is integrated today on top of vendor-specific APIs. And later, now we will switch to show how it will be built on top of high-level API and the benefit of it. Now today, actually you made a good point. Now today, we have contributed this USP integration, and we have contributed this Web GUI framework in Purple WRT. But can you take it and use it right away? If you take it right away, you will be able to get 50–60% of functionality if you use OpenWRT. Yes. If you don't use OpenWRT, you will not be able to benefit from it at all. But if it was built on the standardized APIs, then our contributions, for example, could be fetched and used right away. Then you could, by default, without almost doing any effort, have a lot of coverage with Web UI, and you would already have the USB support on your system. So that's also one point I will try to bring, is that why building these services, this kind of pieces on high-level API, also will help us benefit from these contributions that we do on Purple under Pumper umbrella, so that we could benefit from each other development as well. So if I was not clear on with USP part, sorry, but my main intention with showing USP was how you actually build today USP and, for example, Web GUI on APIs, OpenWRT-based APIs, which doesn't have high-level API, which doesn't follow high-level API standard at the moment. Is that clear?
Yeah, please continue. Maybe I have some extra questions at the end.
Okay. Yeah. For any questions, more detail, we can go later. So this is the main answer we give. But anyone who also has more answers why high-level API is needed, even when we have in this kind of coverage with vendor extensions, of course, welcome after this brief. But now, this is simply I try to show how it would work on OpenWRT with high-level API in place. Now, on high-level API working group, there is already these API definitions, and there is some now discussions for further enhancements in terms of coverage and also interaction with APIs. Once that piece is implemented, it's pretty much the main point is that, okay, for vendor like us can still have all these UBAS, UCI objects and their own extensions, but it's up to the vendor that eventually the main point will be that we and other vendors will support high-level API, which can be accessible through system IPC and also JSON RPC, etc., with different various protocols. And then building services, we start moving this already built services and build new services on top of that high-level API. And here I try to show how USP would work versus today when we have high-level API. So simply you could see that now in this approach, BBR data model library directly is communicated with high-level API, meaning that once we have the high-level API definitions, final version, and once we're in place, this simply the JSON files that I had showed earlier will be changed to map to this high-level API. And then it means that any vendor who actually is going to support high-level API on their platform can simply take this old USP effort that's in purple and make use of it. Can take this Web GUI framework and make use of it. And anyone else who builds, let it be cloud-based playground or platform or whatever application service on that, those things can be shared among us. Of course, some of those things is going to be priority, but some of things will be also openly shared between the community. So this is mainly of course, now that we don't have the final version of high-level API, it's difficult to demonstrate how it would really look in detail, but at least here I try to visualize how it will be built. And you can see the containerized application services also would now start talking to high-level API instead of talking to OpenWRT and vendor-specific APIs, which can still live under the high-level API. So when I put these boxes, of course, I could talk a bit more in detail how the security works on OpenWRT, API security, how you really interact with the APIs, but I will not touch those parts. If anyone has any questions on that level, I am willing to answer, and there is already more OpenWRT developers here who are better at answering those questions than me. So those technical things we can discuss and take later. But here I mainly wanted to show how actually a software vendor build applications, the services, and try to tackle the problems of operators today, and how it would work actually tomorrow. And once we actually follow this common high-level API, how we would benefit from the industry contribution better. And for the ones who wants to play with these framework components themselves, play around and make a feel of it, in the purple feeds, you will be able to get access to all these components, which is Git purple there. And then if you want to get access to source code, these slides I think will be shared. You can get access to the codes and simply get a feel of it. Okay, thank you. And any questions?
Thank you very much, Shukru. That was definitely very interesting. I would add, just for all of you that had the same problem that I did with reading, we will distribute the slides after. All of the slides will be distributed in one pack, so that you have them for later consumption, and then you'll also have the email address of the speaker to ask questions around that. Does anyone have a question for Shukru at this moment right now? Okay.
Hi, I'd like to know what is the status of the high-level APIs? Is it already, the standard is out, or the APIs are out, or is there a certain timeline that you're working with?
Okay. On that, actually, I could give the mic to Joao, who has.
Hi, can you hear me? So right now, there's already one specification on the high-level API, but I think the most important thing to clarify is that the high-level API is not one single block. It's not, for example, a remote management protocol. It's intended to be a collection of services which have independent life cycles. So it will always be an evolving effort. So it could be that today we have one specific service on a specific version, and later on we find a need to extend that specification, that specific service, then we can do that. And we can do that without creating high-level API version 2. Naturally, there are new things coming in, new functionality that we think needs to be added. That's always an ongoing. So I hope that answers your question.
I didn't do it. Control of sound is at the back of the room. I saw everyone look at me. I cannot. Usually in the working group calls, I can do that. I can actually mute people. I have only done that once so far in the last 16 months, so let's hope we keep it that way. Was that me causing the... Oh. Maybe it was intentional. No, it was not. Did that answer the question? Okay, awesome. Do we have any other questions in the room? Aha, just to the side over there.
Hi. I have a question. Can you please switch back to the previous slide again? Yeah. And the question is, if I understand it correctly, you are mapping the high-level API to the UCI. So you will have some kind of adapter from the high-level API to the UCI. And if we are going through the data model which is presented by Broadband Forum, you are mapping like data model to the high-level API, which will be mapped then to the UCI. And why is this process chosen? Because it looks like mapping the broadband data model, the TR-181, it's more fitable to the presentation of the router's parameters, because high-level API is more like objects for the external. So isn't it more reasonable to map the high-level API to data model, maybe in this way? Why this direction was chosen?
Thanks for the question. I think that's a very valuable question. And basically, the intention, I think there is a big misconception here. That's why I think these kind of questions are always very productive. So right now, if you look at USP, TR69, they are remote management protocols, right? If you want to develop, for example, a mobile application, with TR69 you had to go through ACS, but USB, now you can do that directly, and that's actually a service. But if you start, but there is a second kind of service, which is services that reside within the gateway, right? So for example, the web GUI is a very, very basic example. So you can look at the functionality that the data models that BBF has, all that functionality there. You can pretty much do that with USB and so over, but it's an overhead to do that. You would have to do an internal HTTP or MQTT request in order to do that. But that's only from, you usually do that through access to the internal bus, right? On OpenWrt you have UBus, on RDK you have CCSP, and now there's a shift for RBus. And if you start thinking about other features like you have a mesh controller, right? You really want to optimize for efficiency. So it's a lot of overhead using a remote management protocol for doing that, although it can be. Now, naturally, we can also discuss about the data model, right? Because many times we talk about USB, but some people talk it from the standard point of view, the protocol. Other people talk it from the data model as of TR181 perspective. And the truth is, there is a lot of functionality there, but there are other things that are still missing. So a clear example, and we are having discussions with BBF, by the way, in this regard, to see if we can help those two initiatives to come together, is logging, for example, or persistent storage, right? If you look at TR181 today, you can upload log files, right? But if you are developing a web GUI, for example, and you want to register one event like the user admin has failed to authenticate, you are not going to upload a file, right? You want an API to say, I want to register this event, and I want to do that away. Another thing is, for example, persistent storage, right? You might have a service that you want to persist configuration. If you look at TR181 today, you have a complete log file. So there are some things which are missing right now in TR181, which is perfectly normal because it's a remote management protocol. But we can always work to try to get those two coming together. But the big message right here is USB tries to be services residing outside the device, but there's also a need to develop things which happen inside the device, and that's the short message to your answer.
So I'm Andy Kamiragaya, working on Vodafone. I just wanted to make sure that the message is clear. Sometimes we mix up a bit messages, right? We talk about high-level API, and we start talking about UCI, we start talking about UBus. For me, it's much simpler. Problem statement is, from the ISP perspective, there is no there is no OpenWrt there. There is many implementations from many vendors, which means everybody does their own API, right? You want to integrate anything there, you need to go to every specific model and integrate one by one. That's the problem statement. So how do we solve that? So we don't go, I mean, a good starting point is to have, harmonization on the upper level. That's what a high-level API is about. It's not about UBus, it's not about anything, beyond that. Very simple, yeah? And there's a common language. Every application, can integrate with all the gateways, yeah? It's as simple as that. And actually, we're trying to even abstract the bus, right? This is exposed in the IPC, and what we want to be is even, abstracting that. So, other platforms like RDKB can also offer a high-level API. That's Vodafone's vision that we try to share with the community, yeah? So very simple. So no UCI, nothing like that. I will keep the picture much simpler. And it's not dependent on anything like OpenWrt. This will be a stack-independent initiative. That's how we see it, yeah? So I just wanted to make sure that that message is clear. And there is the debate also on using TR181, being Sven we have some debates on that. And Joe made the point, right? From historically, the purpose of the whole TR69 initially and all the data models, it was meant for something else. So we thought there is a need for an API on the CPE, that is meant for integrating services, and that's where the purpose of high-level API. Now, USP is starting to get in that space, yeah? And just wanted to share with the community here, you know, we have the board discussion last week, and basically we want to get closer to the Broadband Forum community, right? To make sure that, you know, the purple initiatives fit well on the USP picture and so on. So we're working also in that direction. Yeah, we need to see and make sure that we are not creating competing propositions there, you know, USP versus purple high-level API. That should not be how we should frame it, yeah? So that's, just wanted to share, yeah.
You take the...
I would like to add something because this kind of questions are coming back again and again. I think that the misunderstanding comes from because of the beginning of what we call today high-level APIs. And that's true. It's basically about exposing features that are already expressed in data models. But this is just a beginning. So this is why it makes this confusion. But in the future, we will have to add new APIs that will probably have nothing in common with any data models. Let me give you an example. If you want to develop applications that need to have a look on, let's say, 200 first packets coming from a given device, this is not something that you will express in a data model. This is just a functional API. And this is what is necessary to develop new services, etc., and to leverage, you know, the external innovation. So when you start talking about this kind of APIs, we are not talking anymore about any data model. So it's just a beginning. This is not the objective. And the reasons they explain it are perfectly valid, but this is just the beginning.
Sorry, I just want to check with the room. I do think that this is a very valuable discussion. I just want to make sure that everyone knows we're going into the break time now. So if you need a coffee kick before the next session, maybe take 2 minutes very quietly and get the coffee, because I do not want to interrupt this discussion too much, if that's okay with everyone.
Just a small hint, because the question raised up again and again. I think there are errors missing between the high-level API and the UBus objects. Then it makes more clear that there's something going on. This looks at the moment that this is going, the high-level API is going only to the data model, so that's my impression.
Yeah, a high-level API could actually end up being just an UBus object itself. Okay.
My question is a bit technical. So have you guys looked at how this approach may or may not work with any real-time applications or real-time services? Because you keep making reference to UBus, right? And then I just want to see what you guys looked at, how it may or may not perform.
Are you specifically referring if it works on top of UBus or on top of high-level API?
Then let me be more specific. So, you know, there are Wi-Fi drivers, right? They're chipset companies, provide Wi-Fi drivers, great. And then there's some functions in there that typically CPE vendors don't want to expose, whether they have a middleware level or they, you know, there's some code that's not clean, etc. So then people who may want to access that, they have to write their code, a whole bunch of mess, right? And that contributes to this 18-month development cycle that the carriers talk about, if you want. So, but to do anything with that, you have to access the Wi-Fi driver, especially if you're doing anything real-time or something critical, like channel scans, this kind of things. So I think I'm giving enough flavor. I don't want to take everybody's time here. So instead of accessing the Wi-Fi driver directly, right, how would this architecture ensure that those services are accessible, right,
Okay, now
I just want to solve the, I want to understand, I'm sure you guys looked into this, because this is a very messy area, right?
I think
That
I
would be
understand.
wonderful if we could fix this problem so we don't have to do a million different versions of development.
So I'll just try to answer, but for example, that goes a bit inside on some of the purple WRT topics that we try to handle as well. So how we try to build this thing is, or the main point is that the application services will never access the Wi-Fi drivers directly. That's already one of the points, that they always start with the restricted access list and then they get access. So the responsibility here on this, the things that we see, user space applications, control gateway functions, all the applications that are responsible with accessing the drivers and controlling the subsystem is supposed to be built on that layer. And then they become providers to higher layers, which means, for example, I have a Wi-Fi manager that I need to do scanning. So I make my UBus call or RBus call on RDKB or whatever, which then Wi-Fi manager takes that one and then goes to driver, scans it, and then return the results on UBus. And then on that let's say Wi-Fi.radio scan function on UBus, then you choose on the high-level API, okay, I have a smart Wi-Fi solution. I will give access to that specific UBus object through the high-level API access control. But I have also a DSL object, which comes from DSL manager, and that smart Wi-Fi solution has nothing to do with it. It has nothing to do with the DSL drivers or etc. So I will not give access to that. So the high-level API services built on top is supposed to be higher level and not interact. But the specific subsystem manager are responsible with handling the communication with driver and exposing that necessary APIs to higher layers.
One second, can you please, sorry, for the kids at home.
This is fantastic, right? That's exactly what we want to do. I guess the question is, how do we ensure that what you say, these services or these functions are accessible through UBus, etc., in a way that doesn't limit the Wi-Fi driver functions, right? Because if it limits, it becomes a subset of what's available. I'm just giving one example. There are other things, right? Then what we're doing is we're actually, instead of standardizing, we're again like kind of carving out portions of functions that are not going to be available through UBus. So we have to make sure that whether it's through UBus or some other means, whatever we're exposing, right, doesn't limit the functions available on the resources. But I think we see this on the real world, right? We hate accessing Wi-Fi drivers. It's horrible. We do Wi-Fi management, a lot of work. But without that, how is this available, right? On this kind of framework, I think we need a bit more thought because the real world data is not in line with what we're saying.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're definitely gonna come back.
I was gonna point to our efforts on the low-level API more general, but I think that Wouter is gonna cover some of those parts. Then we can, once those two discussions combine, we can have maybe more specific discussions on that. But yeah. Otherwise I will dive into the low-level API and purple WRT topics.
One second. I'm going to use this as a segue into the program here. If you look at the program day 2 in the afternoon, we have 2 sessions that are called, I'm going to read it off here, working groups. That's time where we can actually address really detailed questions on the different efforts, and then also give the experts from the different working groups the chance to actually take the feedback, respond, and also take in new points that we use as triggers for new conversations in the upcoming working group meetings. I would suggest, instead of going into more details, I'm not sure, Randy, what your question is going to be, but I was going to suggest that we at least do a 5-minute stretcher before the next session, so that people can go outside, walk around a little bit, get a coffee or other things, and then we come back to hear from the Broadband Forum. Is that I know how that starts. I am in the, I know where that leads. So I'm going to be master of ceremony here, and thank Shukru very, very much for the session, and obviously Joao for being here, and Yevgeny again.
Thank you, everyone.
So you see that we do have topics in Purple that are very, very exciting and that people actually get deeply involved in. So with that, I leave you to your 5-minute stretcher, and then we'll be back at 11:45. Thank you very much.
Una mattina mi son svegliato, oh bella ciao.
Okay. Are we back? I'm not sure if this is, Am I back on the, yes, now I can hear myself again. Thank you very much for coming. Thanks everyone for coming back inside. I see you have the coffee. And I also see two gentlemen who are doing exactly what I was going to ask you guys to do now. We have, I just spoke to our local health officer. As we always assign one to Purple events. You know that. I want to tell a little story. So this event is half handcrafted. So we have worked with a lot of providers of small services, but we've also done a large portion ourselves. And I'm happy to reveal parts of that. The rest of the reveal comes later. We bought a lot of water for you guys. This is 160 liters of water. We have medium sparkling and still water. So please, our health officer asked, please drink more water. We have noticed that all of you should be heavily dehydrated by now. So please don't only get a cup of coffee, but also supplement your coffee diet with 2 or 3 glasses of water over the next hour. With that, we'll go back to the normal program, and you can already see that we have our next speaker up here. Over the last year, the Purple Foundation has worked quite successfully and collaborated quite successfully with the Broadband Forum. I myself had the chance last week to actually talk at the Broadband World Forum as part of the base workshop as the program, and we wanted to do exactly the same the other way around. So we invited the Broadband Forum, we invited Robin to come over and also give his perspective here at the Purple Summit for those that weren't there last week, and also to get their perspective a little bit how Purple can actually help and how those two organizations can together work with ISPs and everyone else from the ecosystem there. So without further ado, give a round of applause for Robin.
Okay, so good morning. Thanks for the introduction, and it's certainly so good to be here. I was kind of wondering, who was going to be, in the audience, who would be coming here, and it's certainly an interesting sort of group. And I would sort of say I feel like I might be a little bit in the lion's den. So when I give my presentation, please bear in mind that I'm the CEO of the Broadband Forum. I'm kind of responsible for strategy. I do a lot of kind of the business development kind of activity and also running the organization. So don't fire too many kind of technical questions at me. I know enough to be dangerous. It's kind of always the way I kind of characterize what I sort of do. But I do understand kind of where we're sort of going, and I think I have a very good appreciation for the potential of what we're going to do with Purple Foundation. And so let me sort of get into a little bit sort of like more about so the focus of the sort of BBF. So we've been evolving for quite sort of some time. For those of you that sort of know our history, we started off very much in the kind of the DSL space. I mean, that's what we were called originally, was the DSL Forum. And but the aims and objectives of the organization really haven't sort of changed. Even though we started off really in the DSL space, just so purely in access, it was really about kind of popularizing the technology. That was really the original purpose of the forum. But it kind of gradually evolved into how do we address the technical issues that are getting in the way of deploying that particular technology. So it went from being sort of like more marketing, then heavily into resolving issues such as, so architectural standards, so developing conformance, then obviously that moving into developing interoperability, so reducing complexity, reducing cost of deployment, and then eventually leading into the management space. And as you all know, what we did with TR69. So very much, though, always being focused on how do you have mass deployment of broadband. And that's why I sort of say, I think sort of today, even with the advent of all the technologies that have happened, you know, sort of since then, so when you look at kind of fiber deployment, you look at these sort of 4 areas that I kind of have up here. So, you know, looking at what we do with sort of 5G, generally in the connected home, cloudification, all of the next-gen access technologies, our thrust is still very much the same thing, is how do you get to that mass market? So, you know, frankly, in Western Europe, North America, large parts of Asia, you can say that penetration is such a high rate that, you know, we've succeeded. We kind of won the battle for that, for mass deployment. But now you move on to this, you know, the next sort of frontier, which is obviously how do you increase value for those subscribers? You know, how do you move from, say, just giving them connectivity and just giving them gigabit speeds? How do you move to truly a quality of experience that then leads into these new services? So that's kind of got us onto our next sort of like phase. So we also started off as being just a regular standards body, you know, the regular kind of waterfall kind of processes. And, you know, I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day, and I'd kind of sort of forgotten this, but when I joined the organization, we were still fairly paper-driven. It wasn't quite as archaic as it was at the beginning. At the beginning, you were given a wad of paper when you came to a meeting. When I joined, it was still like everything was given to you on a CD. Now we've moved to this sort of process where it's much more agile. So not only do we produce, you know, everything is online and we're using kind of collaboratory kind of tools, we also a couple of years ago developed the infrastructure so that we can do open projects. So this was kind of where this concept of open broadband came from, was how you marry open source techniques with open standards. So of course we've always been open on the sort of standards front. It's always been open to anyone that's interested in broadband technology to join. But open source, of course, was a new concept sort of to us. So how do we sort of deal with this? And so on the tools front, you know, we use Confluence. You know, our wiki is really the way that you interface with the organization. It's how you have those ongoing sort of like discussions. But then on the IP front, so let me just kind of be blunt about it. You know, we were and still are a RAND organization when it comes to developing our specifications. So that would be, you know, if you're developing, you know, architectures, the management framework, so TR69 and USP is delivered on a RAND sort of basis. So we are still safe harbor for that intellectual property. However, we also recognized at the same time when we started to look at a lot of the open source projects that, of course, you know, who could disagree that developing reference implementations based on those standards should be open source. For us, the issue was how do we do that in our RAND framework, but we developed a way of doing it. So several of the projects I'm going to sort of talk about are part of the Broadband Forum, but interestingly enough, and I don't want to sort of confuse anyone, but we actually developed these projects as projects under the board of directors. So they aren't directly within the technical committee, but there's a relationship, obviously, between the technical committee work and the work of each of these separate sort of like pieces. We have been doing, you know, obviously doing software a very long time. You know, frankly, when we started to look at developing these open broadband reference implementation kind of projects, a lot of the kind of questions sort of came up. Oh, it's like, you know, the BBF is now kind of going into sort of software. And of course, this is kind of bizarre. You know, it's like, no, we've always been doing sort of software. It's just, you know, maybe we didn't always think of it sort of like this way, but you know, TR69 has been around a very long time. And of course, we were always in the business of developing data models. But I think what I'm trying to sort of get at is that we kind of, this became a much more conscious process for us. That the more we looked at how do you develop these open source software projects, it became a question of, you know, are our techniques, were the kind of methodology we were using, did that need to be developed sort of further? Did we need to get more agile, to sort of coin a phrase? And I think we realized that, yes, you know, yes, we did need to get away from that waterfall approach. However, we couldn't lose the idea of developing consensus. And I've got to sort of say, I resonate a lot with what Mike was sort of saying from the operator point of view, and what their end goal is, I think is sort of something that would be sort of shared by the Broadband Forum, you know, community, and certainly the operators involved in the Broadband Forum, I think would absolutely echo this approach that, yes, you want to be agile, but you absolutely want this mass market. So how do you achieve that mass market? Well, you drive consensus, particularly amongst the operator community, because then if you've got those requirements really in consensus, that's what can lead to your big mass open market. So let me sort of like look at this. So there's sort of 3 projects that I thought were particularly, you know, relevant to this group. And but before I kind of get into that, I mean, I was having some interesting kind of offline discussion before coming up on stage, and I think there's maybe a couple of things that we should try and do as a community, because you know, we have had some very good cooperation, I think, with Purple, but sort of frankly, I think we can probably do better. You know, in all honesty, I think that most of that project has been run between the last one of these 3. So the Open Broadband Map project has been the one that was first aimed at the cooperation with Purple. Some of that has kind of moved on, and actually our USP agent project has also worked very closely with Purple. But this has been still fairly organic. What I think we could probably sort of do better is, I think we should actually be more strategic. I think we should probably have much more strategic discussion between the organizations, between the various, you know, between the 2 communities, and actually beyond just the BBF and Purple, we could go further than that. Because I think if we're going to realize that aim that Mike was talking about, so, and I really don't think, you know, Verizon aren't on their own with this. I think there's plenty of other operators that would absolutely sort of resonate. But if we're going to really drive that, I think we really do need to pull in more operators. In honesty, I think we need more operators. I think we need a much stronger story to the vendor community, because I think the question that came up earlier, I think, you know, this whole idea of what's in it for the vendor is also a very important question to answer. You know, you can't just have, you know, one of the dangers, I think, sometimes when we sort of talk about open source projects and, you know, what kind of the drivers are, you know, sometimes for some vendors that can be a very scary proposition. It's like, so what are you taking away from me? You know, what differentiation are you killing in your process of your drive for open source? Now, I don't think that's the case with the work between Purple and BBF. You know, and let me emphasize that. I really don't think that's what we're doing at all. But are we doing a good enough job with, one, having a clear strategy between our organizations so there's no overlap? Because I think and I know that came up in the last sort of talk, I think that is a definite question that we should answer. But I think the other thing we should answer is, as a more joined up community, we need to, I think we need to message to the wider broadband community much clearer. What exactly is the strategic aim of these projects. You know, what are we trying to achieve? What then is the buy-in for the operators? Because then we can maybe get more of those operators in. And at the same time, I think we could make a lot of vendors feel much more comfortable that the direction we're going in is actually extremely beneficial for them, that they can benefit from this mass open market being available to them. And I really don't think you can underestimate those messaging issues. So last week at Broadband Forum, I held a workshop. I was chairing a workshop on 5G. And one of the big subjects for that, of course, was the 5G RG. And so one point that Lance Kunders made from Verizon, so Mike's colleague, is he made this sort of comment, which really kind of struck me, because you don't hear many people sort of say it quite as bluntly as this. And you really don't hear operators say this, I think, enough, is that there is a relationship between how much we're really looking for from open source in a given project and how much, you know, really needs to be differentiation from the vendors so that you have this more kind of healthy ecosystem. And that's basically what he was talking about, was this sort of idea of what's the grand strategy and then what makes for a real kind of healthy value chain in the whole kind of community. He actually mentioned a number, and he sort of said, well, you know, maybe it's something like 70-30. You know, maybe there's that kind of relationship between, you know, sort of, so maybe 70% of it is open source and there's 30% to you know, the bells and whistles on top, you know, the differentiation from the vendor. I mean, who knows whether that's exactly the right percentage? But what I really thought was very valuable about saying that is it gives a vision, you know, it gives some strong messaging, you know, to the vendor community that there's something to work from here, that it's not just a question of an expectation of, you know, what exactly are you giving to the community and how much you could possibly get back. So I thought that was a very valuable way of looking at things. So anyway, I'll get back to the sort of meat of the sort of presentation now, but I just wanted to give that message out. I really think that kind of longer term strategic discussion would be extremely valuable. So for USP, so I got a couple of sort of slides that just sort of give the sort of the setting. I know a lot of you already know USP, but I just wanted to kind of, there's a couple of things I wanted to sort of say with this sort of slide. So one is obviously the length of the history behind the protocol. So, you know, TR69 has been around, you know, so 15 years. Extremely successful protocol. So we've gone from startup, and frankly, probably at the time, we didn't even think of this as being a product launch, even though maybe it was. But we think there are now 1 billion devices which are managed globally using TR69. So very, very successful, but there's no doubt we hit a wall, and that wall was IoT and virtualized services, so services going into the cloud. But I think IoT was the big one. Now, interestingly enough, it wasn't that TR69 couldn't do some of those things, because I know of a few deployments of absolute kind of end-to-end smart home solutions using TR69. But TR69 was used in a way that effectively broke it. You know, it was pushing the parameters of what TR69 could do. But interestingly enough, and I think this is kind of an important point, is that TR69 could actually, you know, do it. So it showed, to us anyway, when we were developing the ideas behind USP, is that this was a going concern. There really were operators that wanted to do this. There were operators that saw the value generally in how that remote management was done, but that it wasn't going to scale. So most of the deployments that personally I knew about were sub 500,000 subscribers. So in those environments, they could deal with the traffic that was being sort of generated. They could deal with the number of devices. But once you started going above that, the concern obviously is it just wasn't going to scale. So there were various issues around kind of granularity. You know, a lot of people would sort of say, and I think probably it would resonate with this group, is that, you know, the footprint for TR69 was just too big. So, and actually I should sort of add to that. So it was too big, but also because TR69 had kind of organically grown from just basic high-speed internet services, you know, layering on top, you know, over the years, you know, things like, you know, set-top box, network attached storage, you know, all of those sort of things were added on top of it, but kind of just, that's what really led to it being kind of just too heavyweight. So we went back to sort of square one and said, okay, so if we were really interested in protecting those billion devices, which obviously we were very interested in doing because that was our community, how would we sort of do this? How could we have some kind of backwards compatibility so that we didn't kind of cannibalize our current market and the market for our members? So we came to the conclusion, yes, it needed to be a new protocol, but that was basically the reason to protect all of the data models. So that was really our migration path. That was the decision on how we would migrate. So, you know, simply sort of said, so that's what USP is a system of controllers and agents. And we went from the sort of point of view of saying that what were we trying to resolve here? Well, you know, I think it's fair to say that, yes, we were trying to address that IoT market. We were trying to address services going into the cloud. But we also recognized that we had to have kind of the multi-tenancy kind of idea. So there very easily could be more than one operator or provider involved in that sort of home, whether they were another operator in the traditional sort of sense or whether they were, you know, potentially an OTT player, or of course, you know, kind of the obvious one would be another wireless provider. So that was one sort of like thing. The other sort of side of it was moving from just management to user control. So that was obviously the ideas behind truly what you needed to deliver for IoT services. So, you know, here's kind of it's a bit of an eye sort of chart, this. But it probably the sort of biggest thing to sort of pull out of this, it is this sort of idea of coexistence with a TR69 sort of deployment. There were a lot of things that were driven over from the old deployments, and obviously, and it relies upon TR181 device 2. I'm not going to go into all of that sort of detail for now, and I'm sure you know it anyway, but you can have these slides. I'm more than happy that you take these slides away. So here's the sort of basic sort of like architecture. And, you know, it kind of pulls out those sort of like points that you can have sort of two places, or in fact more than two places for control. And the ACS, and here's the migration path, is that the ACS can manage TR69 devices or USP, and we already know that some of this exists. So one question we had from a lot of people for last week was, how much have you actually seen in the market? There's 3 deployments that I know of that are already starting to deploy USP-driven devices. They can't be named as yet. You know, there's a certain amount of sort of NDAs around these deployments, but it's good to know that there are 3, and I hope fairly soon we're going to be able to sort of say one of these that has happened. So what are we actually sort of working on sort of like today? So there's been, so these are the USP 1.1 updates. So most of this you would have sort of seen already, and some of the work that was already mentioned, I think, in that you know, last presentation, which was very useful, and I think that kind of saves me some effort sort of like here. But some of this you would have seen actually in that deployment. So NTP, so proxy management, the controller REST APIs, support for MQTT, the bulk data collection, a compliance test plan, and then the beginnings of IoT devices being supported. So maybe the first iteration of USP did, it had the basic requirements for the sort of protocol, but this was what we needed to add in sort of straight away. And you will notice that, in fact, a lot of the requirements that drove the later developments of TR69 are in here. It's much more kind of granular, but there's some things which are very, very sort of similar. So the bulk data collection was something that we actually developed with TR69 kind of later in its life. Okay, so here's the device 2 recent sort of updates. Now, it's important to kind of say, in parentheses, it sort of says here, general. So these apply to both USP and TR69. So TR69 has not been deprecated, and that's a very strong message I want to make sure kind of is clear to the industry, is that our strategy for device management is we expect coexistence between these two protocols for quite some time. Again, that question came up last week. What exactly are you carrying on in development, and how long do you think TR69 is going to be in the market? And frankly, I think TR69 might be supported for a very, very long time, because if you look at sort of some of those kind of more typical kind of low-end users on broadband, you know, would they really have a need to migrate over? I would suspect that a lot of the migration is going to be a real kind of question for the operator, and in terms of what devices do they already have in the network, and what's their business case for migration. But from our point of view, we think we need to support this for quite some time. So you can sort of see in here a lot of this is obviously it's Wi-Fi related. That's been a very, very big push, which I'm sure doesn't sort of surprise you at all. But as I say, both of these changes support both TR69 and USP. Now these ones are particularly for USP, and again you can sort of see this is very focused on IoT. The bulk data reporting is obviously now a much bigger issue than it was in the past. I mean, it was always an issue for TR69, but of course it's going to be much bigger for USP. So here's for the USP agent. So this project sort of started later, of course, than USP did it. I mean, we took some time looking at USP and saying, okay, so we have a migration path. We have 1 billion subscribers on TR69. How do we now take this forward in terms of not just encouraging operators to go to USP, but how do we make life easier for the vendor community going to USP? So this is where USP Agent, where the open source USP Agent project came from. The code came from a particular vendor, but went through all the usual kind of processes you would expect in how it's been developed. But I think there's obviously some similarity between why we did things this way for USP and what the whole project in Purple has been. There's obviously a kind of similar thought process here. We've already gone through 2 releases, so we've been doing the kind of usual sort of bug fix sort of like work, but a lot of data model improvements as well. And then this is what we have coming up for the next major release. So we haven't made sort of solid decisions yet, but this is the list that we're like looking at. So it's the MQTT, MTP support, WebSockets, the kind of the whole controller sort of trust sort of issue. Security is sort of definitely an issue we're looking at. There's a whole load of other things, but I would sort of suggest, if you are interested, one of the things with our open broadband projects is you don't need to be a member. to be involved in those projects. I mean, of course, I would like you to be a member, but because these projects are not under our technical committee, they're under the board. Part of the reason why we did it that way is so that this can be truly open source and non-members can join. So if you're interested, it's a very easy process. There's a fairly straightforward CLA that you sort of sign on to. But I would definitely encourage you if you're interested and not already a member. So I don't need to sort of say too much about this slide because that last presentation was excellent, looking at exactly what's happening between IOPSIS and CommScope. So the project was completed, of course, and you sort of saw that on that last presentation. But this is also kicked on to a newer sort of project that's kind of under process at the moment. So looking at the kind of whole USP agent and the RDK. So CommScope, again, are very sort of involved in this sort of whole process, and they've been one of the real instigators for these projects. Okay, so now I'm going to sort of change gears and say, so I thought this was also very interesting for this community, is that, you know, the BBF does more than working around sort of device and service management. And, you know, so what we do with USP and TR69, because we are very kind of operator driven when it comes to the requirements that drive the organization, this was the big kind of subject that's been kind of floating around really for, you know, frankly, probably for the last sort of 2 years. Maybe I'm doing a disservice. It's probably been around even longer than that. And you all know, you know, what the sort of issue is. You know, this is kind of talked about kind of endlessly. You know, here are the sort of like, you know, we know these are the issues that affect the operators, you know, the most. The majority of calls that go into call centers feature these issues. That's what they think of. You know, that's what the user thinks of when they think that their broadband has a problem. So part of the reason why we were a little bit resistant maybe to doing this work at the beginning is, of course, it's Wi-Fi, and it's you know, how much does the Broadband Forum do in an area like Wi-Fi? Now we have worked in Wi-Fi in terms of all of the activity with USP and TR69. Of course, we have a high interest there, and we've worked a lot in developing, you know, APIs and sort of like various kind of sort of, you know, interfaces that we've sort of like worked on. But directly getting involved in Wi-Fi was sort of something that we weren't sure about. But where it really kind of ended up was to say, where do you see operator requirements for performance being really addressed? You know, that was a real problem. We did have some discussion with the Wi-Fi Alliance. We were encouraging to try and get sort of some of this testing up and running, but it was problematic. So we started to look at what the requirements should be. So what kind of sort of things should really kind of look at that? So, I mean, this is a bit sort of jokey, but so do you have internet? Of course, that's what most people think of when they, you know, when they sort of say Wi-Fi, that's really what they mean. Do they have broadband? Do they have an internet connection? So they do obviously think of Wi-Fi directly as a substitute for when they say broadband. You know, there's obviously the increased number of devices, you know, all the things you kind of sort of like know about. Operators have, you know, obviously definitely responded, but there are managed Wi-Fi offerings of various flavors that are already sort of starting. There's a lot of proprietary stuff obviously out there. But then they started having these discussions in the BBF about what requirements really need to be driven. So what really made carrier grade Wi-Fi? So it was obviously looking at the testing coverage for AP devices. We tried to be very pragmatic about it, so it was what's really being deployed sort of today, what's coming up sort of like next. you know, as I said at the beginning, absolutely driving a consensus amongst all of the operators involved in terms of what they thought we should sort of like look at. So, you know, there's you know, a fairly obvious list here. So RF performance, bandwidth, stability, interference, capacity, you know, coverage. We addressed all of those areas. So those were the parameters we looked at for the testing, and those were the test cases that we developed. So there's a very strong focus on actually what is out there today, so you can obviously help operators in the immediate future. The test metrics are based off of real devices, so this was developed in a fairly traditional way in terms of how the BBF has always developed its test requirements, is we don't just do it from a theoretical point of view, it's always tested in a lab with real elements that then flows back into the test cases. So I mean, effectively, a little bit like we do with Plugfests. You know, it's that same kind of interactive, you know, approach. And we're aiming, obviously, at always being repeatable, very, very well documented. I don't need to give you the sort of vocab stuff. I think you know how we do this. So why is it important to the ISPs? Obviously, it's about sort of driving down, you know, really those customer service issues, and really encouraging that kind of whole idea in interop, and obviously security being a big issue, but, you know, interop being kind of one of the big sort of, you know, drivers here. So what do we have sort of coming up next with TR398? So TR398 has been actively tested, and I know it's been tested in so North America, Europe, mainland China. I know it's also in Taiwan. This is getting very, very actively sort of taken up. And frankly, you know, one of the things that's really occurring to us now is that maybe this needs to move. Well, it definitely needs to be added to, because 398, the issue 1, was only really the first set of test cases. We need to add a lot more. So you can sort of see the whole kind of like list here of what we're kind of starting to look at. The issue 2 is being already worked on, but then we're starting to sort of think to ourselves that what should this look like in the sort of future? You know, do we exactly do something like certification? So probably not exactly certification, but some kind of conformance program, something where you have, you know, labs that you can point at and say, okay, if you go here, you know, they know TR398, they know how to test on 398, they have the right environment. You know, here's a place where you can get a set of standardized test results. So we think that is a good idea to go through. But frankly, then we think to ourselves, you know, what else should really go into a program like that? And, you know, so we look at sort of things like, you know, obviously what the Wi-Fi Alliance is sort of doing. We need to make sure that it's kind of well aligned there, because we obviously don't want to confuse anyone, even though we are very focused on operators as a specific, you know, segment. But, you know, you've got to sort of think about other things. So obviously what you guys are doing in Purple becomes very important. What we're doing in the, you know, in the mesh area between the two organizations. Also, what do we do for testing for USP? Because we have a whole testing program there, which again isn't exactly certification. It's probably going to be a little bit more like self-certification. But we think that there's some real value that you can sort of add there, because if you start to pull all these pieces together, from an operator point of view, do you get to a situation where maybe, you know, I've been kind of toying with this sort of idea that maybe what we should look at is something where it's kind of operator ready, kind of in inverted commas, you know. That would be maybe a nice direction to sort of go in, but I don't think it's just the BBF. I think maybe that's sort of something that we should think about. Is that a good sort of endpoint where you can actually have a package of things that you can deliver to the operator, who then maybe has an easier time of it, because, you know, obviously no one really likes the idea of having multiple certifications that you need to sort of pass, and you get these ridiculously complicated RFPs, you know, coming from an operator. I mean, if we could make that a simpler process, that might be a very good thing, and we could cooperate on test labs. I mean, we already work with a group of test labs, so maybe there's an interesting path forward. Okay, so map. So let's sort of get into this sort of discussion. So this was the original discussion between BBF and Purple. So I'm kind of, obviously you know exactly what sort of like what Purple sort of like does. You know what was originally the conception with MAP is, and I think sort of Mike again mentioned this, but I think a couple of the other sort of speakers did too. That MAP was really focused on where do we need to plug gaps. So there are sort of some things in terms of operator requirements that we think we need to add, or potentially need to add, because obviously we're still kind of, you know, the work really started with Purple and then went, you know, comes over to the BBF as we move on. But are there things we need to sort of like to add? So one of the potential things is that we had a 1905.1a stack originally at the BBF. So we'd had this for some time. It was delivered to us on an open source license. Now, as it turns out, of course, that's not the way that things developed with the Purple project. There was a different stack that was then utilized. And one of the questions that's come up in the BBF community is, of course, some people are still very interested in that 1905.1a stack. So do we potentially take what Purple does and use some of that in extensions? Now, it's all going to be very organic because, of course, it means that somebody's going to obviously, you know, they have to do the work. So, you know, are there those sort of drivers? We're not totally sort of like sure, to be sort of frank, if that's sort of going to happen or not. But that's potentially one of the areas. The other kind of expected, you know, results, of course, are around what happens with USP. So there's obviously all of that device management piece, which we actually have been liaising on already. There's the whole issue around interfaces for third-party controllers. And then, you know, obviously the management sort of framework. So, you know, not just USP, but also with TR69. And I kind of put this ending bullet just, and it's not just for your benefit, really. This is actually more to the benefit of the outside community, is really just to emphasize this point, that what we're trying to do is not tread on the toes of Wi-Fi Alliance. We're obviously very sensitive to that. We respect their position, obviously, as being the owners of Wi-Fi. So what have we sort of done so far? So I think the architectural work has been liaised with Purple. I think those requirements have been taken on board. I think the other thing is certainly in terms of use cases, although I would definitely sort of take the point that the topology database work still needs some way to go. There's a lot been added in terms of the backhaul technologies. So that was one of the strengths that we brought to this, I think, is that obviously our knowledge in terms of all of the access technologies that we sort of brought in. The TR181 data model, of course, that we've talked about. Firmware upgrades, although that's kind of still an area that still does need sort of some development and some discussion. And then sort of, I think sort of like where we sort of go to sort of like next, you know, there's been that initial API design. But, you know, again, I think there's probably a lot more sort of discussion that we need to sort of have. And then lastly on that, the assessment on the Technicolor sort of code. So that really kind of goes to this 1905.1a discussion. You know, it's that still needs sort of like some sort of development. Then lastly, just for your information, so here's the meetings that are kind of coming up. For all members, obviously you're welcome. We have a bunch of obviously conference calls that sort of, you know, happen in between, and but I'll emphasize the open source projects. So the USP agent and OBMAP are open to non-members. Those all happen on conference calls, and obviously what we do on the wiki. So if you're interested, do let me know. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we, at this point in time, have any questions for Robin? And I hope you're not asking because you can all smell that lunch is already served outside.
That's the problem of being right next to lunch.
We do have there's actually multiple questions. Sorry. Need to get the second microphone. Probably.
Yeah.
Looking for this. Sorry. I know, that was me. So I'll just start here, and then I'll come.
Hi, it's Indika again. As I said earlier, we have the board meeting last week for Purple, and we're discussing about, collaboration with Broadband Forum, you mentioned it, that we need to have a tighter, kind of integration. So how do you see the model working? I mean, do you see Purple more integrated into Broadband Forum, or how do you see that collaboration moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly sort of think that we could probably be an awful lot closer. There's the organisations in sort of some ways. I think the communities are obviously very similar. We have a lot of the very self-same companies involved. I think even in terms of licensing, I didn't mention this sort of earlier, but we did have initial questions about how we were going to license the OBMAP project, and we actually went with what was suggested at the beginning, and then there was, as you know, Purple went through some changes, and you changed your licensing. I think one of the most positive things that actually happened at the time is we managed to react to that quite quickly and say, okay, so we'll change our licensing as well to make life easier for the Purple group. So I think in some ways our cooperation has been quite good in that we have been very responsive, but it really does sort of strike me that if we have two boards, we have two marketing groups, but that shouldn't mean that we have two different strategies. I think that to me is the most important thing, is that we have a clear strategy to the market. We've got to make it, I think, apparent to sort of people that there is a large group of operators that are supporting, that the requirements have that larger kind of buy-in. And when we show an architectural map, so I think that last one that was sort of shown with OpenWRT and how it relates with USP, I think maybe we need some frameworks like that we actually advertise to the industry. So maybe we should do things like, I don't know, so the first thing is that we should meet to actually develop what that strategy is, that we have it as a joint strategy. And maybe it's too difficult to do it between completely both communities, but I think that should involve both communities in the discussion. So I don't know, there's various ways I suppose we could sort of do that, but having some joint marketing discussion, but actually we should call it what it is. It's a strategic discussion. And then we come to some agreements, I think, between the two groups of leadership. And maybe that should lead immediately then into a white paper, something we can give to the industry. We do webinars around it. We advertise exactly where we think we're going. And, frankly, that kind of idea, and this has been thrown up by a few people, this sort of idea of kind of operator ready. If we could sort of talk like that, and we could actually agree what we thought should be in that thing, that's maybe where we should try and sort of drive support. So if people start to agree with it, then obviously it's good for both communities. We get more people involved. But, I actually sort of think we probably actually, dare I sort of say this, that we actually have quite a lot of developers and contributors already involved. And maybe it isn't that we desperately need more contributors, although it's always welcome, isn't it, to have more people. More what we need is advertising to actually the people that are going to use the specifications and the software. So I do sort of think having that clear strategy agreed, having something that we can go out to the market with, I think that's the kind of process that I can imagine sort of going through. And I'll sort of say from the BBF sort of point of view, we would be absolutely sort of open to that. I think we've always been very intrigued by what's been happening in Purple, and I think everything that I hear from operators when they say why they're involved. So I've not just heard it from, obviously from Verizon, but what I hear from Vodafone or sort of BT, you know, there's other operators obviously, you know, out there that are interested, but every reason they give for why they're involved is exactly why the BBF is so interested in what you're doing, because it obviously holds water. I just think we've got to be kind of closer, and the one thing I am a little bit nervous about, and I think it goes to a point in that last discussion, is we don't want to sort of see any overlap between USP and Purple. I think you made that point, didn't you? I think that maybe in our last discussion.
So, hi, I'm João. I'm also in Vodafone. I wanted to ask a quick question on that one. So I also share the opinion that we can do better in regards to having a closer relationship between Purple and BBF. So I actually really appreciate that you are here today. I want to thank you for that. And here I also want to ask you a question of if we can do anything to make some of these discussions a bit more open. Because, for example, in BBF, some of these discussions are closed. You need more participation agreements. And personally, I've been coming across this process. And that means that even though we are members of BBF, we are actually excluded from some of the discussions. So my question and also a bit of request is there anything that we can do to also help in this regard? Because it's not a matter of getting the participation agreement side. It's actually a matter of how much time these things take.
Yeah, I'm a bit sort of surprised if, so you say about being excluded from discussions. So do you mean that there was sort of strategic discussion that maybe was between a couple of members?
Yes.
And it's how open that was. I mean, you know, to be honest with you, some of that can be a little bit difficult though, because part of what happens I don't think this is just true for standards organizations. I think this is very true as well for open source projects, is that sometimes you just get private discussion happening between a couple of members because they're trying to work out whether they want to do something jointly. You know, do they want to bring some joint code, you know, to a project, or do they want to bring joint contributions? And some of that gets a little bit commercially sensitive, to be frank. So I think that's partly the reason why that sort of happens. But I do agree with you, though, that we should be as open as we possibly sort of like can. And, you know, using things like the wiki spaces sort of much more kind of effectively. I think, you know, maybe we want to do sort of more things, you know, like this, and actually do it between the sort of two communities, and then invite people in. You know, so one of the changes that we just made, and maybe this really does help actually, is you know that the standards world has had its challenges recently with the Department of Commerce in the US. There have been a lot of pressures on whether you're closed or not as an organization and whether everyone can be involved. Now, I don't want to name any names. I think you all know what the history is here. But there's been some real problems around this. So what was the BBF answer to having restrictions from the US government? It was to say, okay, if we can't do these things in that closed environment, you know, let's be completely open. So we are much more now like the IETF. So everything being open. You know, you can see the process as it goes on. To your point, Joe, you know, you can see the whole process. You can see all the contributions sort of happening. You know, observers can join the Broadband Forum now. You know, we still have an access charge because obviously we still have costs as an organisation, but we've tried to make that as simple as possible for people to get involved and for things to be more, you know, open. You know, maybe what is going to sort of help though, I mean, so not just the organisational piece, but I really sort of think one way that we can encourage the openness is by having a more clearly expressed strategy. Because, you know, it's sort of funny, I mean, at the moment, I think of most of the marketing materials that are produced. Most of it is really about the platform. It's about how you use USP, why USP is a good idea, rather than sort of saying, this is actually what we're trying to address and where we see the market going to next. Maybe if we're more expressive around that, then it would encourage more openness in the discussion, because I do agree that we've got to get away from having too much being closed. But I'll kind of go back to what I sort of said about Lance Kunders and what he said from Verizon. You know, so when he made that comment about 70% open source, 30%, you know, let's sort of say proprietary or extensions, whatever way you want to put it, you know, that 30% would always be something that is more closed. Because of course that's where the IP is involved for the vendor community, and to some extent you've got to let them do those sort of things. But what can we do to make that 70% more open, more strategic, something that you would have complete visibility of as an operator? I think we can. Yes, we can do better, and we are still going through somewhat of a transformation. You know, we are much less the stodgy old SDO that we used to be. We've got away from being that waterfall approach, but we still are going through somewhat of a transformation. And frankly, I would sort of say, you should say that in a BBF meeting. I would say there's nothing to stop that discussion happening and saying, you know what, you know, we would like to be involved in these discussions. You know, please invite us. Because, you know, most of the sort of time, when a big operator sort of says that, the vendors will fall over themselves to pick the phone up to you and say, this is what we're working on, are you interested?
I just want to add to what you said. There was a Connected Home Council in the Broadband Forum meeting yesterday, where we actually discussed just this: how does Purple USP fit together? So we decided we're going to start make some more materials for that. How does USP fit with Purple high-level API? How does these things fit together? Why are they complementary, not competing, right? And I would also like to say, back to Purple, coming from the outside, it can be very hard to, you know, understand what Purple is really doing. It's just one big GitHub. I would like to see some more openness, make it easier to understand how does this Purple high-level API work? What is Purple VRT? Because coming from the outside is very hard, and I think both organizations can be better at this and show how we can work together, and there are complementary solutions.
Yes, so what's been mentioned there, so that's our version of your marketing committee. So we call it a Connected Home Council. The Connected Home Council is it's a marketing sort of group. You know, so it's fairly obvious what they're interested in. All the things I sort of talked about. So anything that's Wi-Fi related, that's USP, TR69, the 5G, RG discussion, all of that basically goes into that marketing group. And so yes, we have been having those discussions about how we relate things. But I think maybe that's the step we should sort of take, is bring those marketing groups together, and we have that more strategic discussion. I would sort of say whoever wants to be involved in that, I think if we could drive something that, you know, in terms of sort of timing, you know, I would say, wouldn't it be good if we had something by the time of Mobile World Congress? Because there's no doubt Mobile World Congress will touch on a lot of these issues because of the 5G RG discussion. If we could come up with a strategy by then, I think that would be great. And if there's sort of something that we could get sign off between the two, you know, leaderships and do it kind of, you know, more formally, as I say, having a white paper, doing webinars, you know, maybe trying to present something, you know, jointly into different groups. You know, we do our own events at BBF as well. And at different times, you know, we've invited you. So Mirko was invited, as he said, to our base event. We will certainly do a lot more of that as well. We have a lot more events next year. So we think we have ones, well, all over the world. So we will sort of certainly do the sort of same thing. But I think it's one thing doing presentations, it's one thing doing events together. But I actually think having a joined up strategy between the two organizations is the critical thing.
Sorry, thank you. I just wanted to directly respond to that, because a lot of things that you said there, Robin, actually resonate a lot with me, because I've been the forefront of Purple, or representing Purple towards the members for a year, and I do recognize that it is very, very difficult to come into Purple to understand what we're actually saying, because we have obviously our own lingo, our own terms, and our website is not always up to date. with what we're doing, and it's difficult to get into the documentation. So absolutely, and I also saw some members looking at me and being like, yeah, we told you. Yes, exactly, you told us. We are trying to address that first on a technology level to figure out where to actually put all of that information, and then the request goes out to every member, because we are very much an open source foundation. Go there, send us pull requests about documentation, or tell us where we need to find someone, and then I will personally try and nag that person to actually write that wiki page or write that article, because yeah, I'm fully with you. We have lots of conversations, and to Joao's point, I think we are exactly the same for people that are not in Purple as Broadband Forum is at times, and I absolutely welcome, and I think I speak for all the members of the board that met last week, that we're very, very interested to do more co-marketing, joint marketing, co-located events, because it does make a lot of sense for us to do those things. So absolutely, that is something. And I just want to commend the OBUSP project and the collaboration with Purple members. I think that was pretty amazing. Also the demo last week. So I think we have shown that we can, if we really want to, and now we just need to up-level the documentation and marketing material.
So I should have mentioned that sort of like earlier. So that demonstration we did last week was really interesting. So Domos, who they kind of organised this with Vodafone and a couple of other companies, and basically what they were sort of demonstrating was the linkage between the Purple project, the USP agent, and another project that we've been developing. So I didn't mention it sort of here, but we call it Quality Experience Delivered. It's another kind of software project. There's an algorithm that's been developed for how you deliver quality of experience to the end user. So it's not about speed, it's about that QoE. That project was demonstrated last week, got a huge amount of attention. We did give Purple had their kind of logo on the demonstration. And maybe one of the things we should aim for in the sort of future is we do a lot more things like that and sort of show how the projects sort of like actually work together. So we don't just sort of tell them what the strategy is, but we actually show them practical examples. Would be sort of very good sort of things. And it did receive a lot of traffic. All of the operators that sort of came through all sort of like saw it, and I think it did go over pretty well. And it kind of lends itself to that idea that I was sort of saying, that idea of being operator ready, because we were plugging various elements together, and the vendors that were involved were deploying this whole kind of sort of picture. I think it came across very well.
Yep. So. Okay. If everyone's fine with that, I would like to thank Roman once again for coming here, sharing his thoughts with us. And I have seen the lunch, and I hope that you're all going to be as excited as I was when I saw it. So how about a big round of applause for Roman again? And then if you would, and by the way, thank you very much all for accepting the glasses of water and drinking the water, obviously. I'm very happy that you're now hydrated. And now we're going to feed you, so please make your way out and to the left down to the demonstration room. There's a buffet. Please enjoy lunch, and then we'll see you in 45, 60 minutes. Thank you.